Today we're talking about the term mid. And when I look around the landscape of the NHL and I look at teams that fall within the definition of mid, there is no other team in my mind that fills that description than the Seattle Kraken. They came into the league through their expansion draft, making them the 32nd franchise in the NHL in 2021, and since then have made the playoffs just one time in their 5 years of existence. And when I look at their roster, I always make the joke that it's like they're almost trying to make the most mid team possible by going out and getting players that are fine but don't move the needle. And it has led to nothing but mediocrity for the Kraken since their inception, to the point where now the original general manager, Ron Francis, is out of his job. So in today's video, I want to take a deep dive into the Seattle Kraken franchise, into their history, see how they got to this point, and what can they do going forward into the 2026 offseason to find their way out of being classified as a mid hockey team. As always, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this. It really helps the channel out. And without further ado, let's get into it. So let's go back in time, not just to the 2021 Seattle expansion draft, but to the 2017 expansion draft of the Vegas Golden Knights. Because if we are to get a grasp on how Seattle was constructed, we need to look back at the Vegas expansion draft as well. Both the 2017 and 2021 expansion drafts were under the same guidelines when it comes to protection of players. At 30 NHL teams, and in 2021 minus Vegas, were to use one of two protection lists in order to protect some of their players. That way they can't be picked. It was either 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and a goaltender, or 8 skaters regardless of position, and 1 goaltender. And since Vegas was the first expansion team in the NHL since the late 90s and early 2000s, the league wasn't necessarily used to a situation like this. Now, these protection lists are different from previous expansion drafts before the Vegas Golden Knights came into the fold, where it allowed Vegas and other future expansion teams to pick up more prominent players in the draft and hopefully be able to build a team that's a bit more competitive out of the gate compared to teams like the San Jose Sharks, where out of the gate they struggled to win 20 games in a season. So with the shorter protection lists, general managers in the NHL, considering they had not dealt with this in a long time since the late 90s and early 2000s, got overzealous and panicked when it came to protecting certain players on their roster that they left exposed in the expansion draft. And as a result, made deals with the Vegas Golden Knights to make sure that they select certain players from the unprotected lists. And when you look back at some of these deals, they are just some of the most preposterous things that you'll ever lay your eyes on. A couple of them weren't necessarily big, but a few of them were massive deals in hindsight. For example, Florida sending Riley Smith to the Vegas Golden Knights to dump his contract, and in exchange, the Vegas Golden Knights were to select Jonathan Marchessault. Both ended up being key contributors to the Vegas Golden Knights, Marchessault being a core piece in the initial inception of the Golden Knights. Minnesota sending Alex Tuch to Vegas to make sure that the Golden Knights select Eric Haula. Anaheim sending Shea Theodore to the Vegas Golden Knights to guarantee that they select Clayton Stoner. Shea Theodore goes on to be a top pairing defenseman for the Vegas Golden Knights, and I would say at this point, their number one guy. Columbus sending David Clarkson, a 2017 first and a 2019 second round pick to make sure that Vegas selects William Karlsson. And then the Pittsburgh Penguins sending a 2020 second round pick to make sure that Vegas selects Marc-Andre Fleury. So overall, Vegas came out of the draft with 10 extra draft picks as well, including 2 extra first-round picks in the 2017 draft, to where the Golden Knights ended up using a lot of these assets that they picked up in the expansion draft to go out and acquire impact players early, making trades for Max Pacioretty and Mark Stone. And those 2 trades really solidified the identity of the Vegas Golden Knights to where they are now the default place that a lot of fans think about when a big name player becomes available. So with that context in mind, Let's now look at Seattle's expansion draft just 4 years later, where a lot of general managers learned from their mistakes with Vegas. So when it came to Seattle, not a single general manager made a trade to guarantee certain picks, which did give Seattle kind of no limits in terms of who they could take, but they also aren't acquiring extra assets that they could use down the line. They did still take some good players. Guys like Vince Dunn and Jared McCann ended up being very solid players for them, but they did not get those extra assets like I talked about. And since that didn't occur for them, they were already behind the 8 ball compared to Vegas. However, they did flip 3 of their selections in the expansion draft for a few picks. They got 1 second-round pick and 2 fourth-round picks, but still, compared to what Vegas came out of the expansion draft with, it's a completely different story. So because that didn't work out for them, Seattle decided to go a different route and pick up players in free agency that could potentially move the needle for them. In that initial offseason, they signed Alex Wenberg, they signed Jaden Schwartz, and Philip Grubauer, who we might forget was a big deal at the time. So going into the 2021-22 season, I actually had decently high hopes for the Seattle Kraken that they would be a solid NHL team. Did I expect them to be like Vegas and, make it to the Cup final in year 1? Absolutely not, but I did expect them to be somewhat decent. And while they did get some good players out of their draft, they didn't have the same luck as Vegas did. And because they didn't have those extra assets like I talked about, they could not go out and make splashes like Vegas could in their early years. That first season post-expansion draft, they did not make the playoffs. They were one of the worst teams in the league. However, the season after that, they actually end up making the playoffs, being a 100-point team. They ended up beating the Colorado Avalanche in the first round, lost in the second round, but that was a good step. But since then, they have not made it to a 500 record, 82 points in 82 games, and as we'll get into, haven't been able to make deals that move the needle for them. So we're going to go through some of the transactions that they made since their expansion draft, and you can make up your mind on how you feel about them, but spoiler alert, my opinion is that a lot of these moves just straight up did not matter in the grand scheme of things and didn't make a massive difference between Seattle being a bad team or a good team. In year 2, in the offseason, they ended up acquiring Oliver Bjorkstrand from the Columbus Blue Jackets for a 3rd and 4th round pick. And like I said before, they were a very, very good team this year. However, they did not buy at the deadline. They did not make a single move throughout the regular season in 2022-23. In my mind, again, this is hindsight, but you probably should have made a move there to make your team better than they were going into the trade deadline. Again, they still get a series win out of that run, but they have not made it back to the playoffs since then. So, part of me wonders that. In year 3, the only trade that they made was acquiring Thomas Tatar in December. Other than that, did not make a move. Year 4, they acquired Daniel Sprong in November and acquired Capo Kakko in December for Bjorgen, a 3rd and a 6th round pick. And this past season, year 5, they acquired Mason Marchment for a few picks, acquired Freddie Gaudreau for a pick in the offseason as well. They ended up trading out Mason Marchment later on in the season, and at the trade deadline acquired Bobby McMahon for a 2nd and 4th round pick. So trade-wise, like I said before, none of these moves in my mind are for players that are making them substantially better or even better at all, really. These are all fine players that can play a role pretty well. They can probably put up 20 goals for some of them, but when it comes to moving the needle, I don't think they do that. Okay, so trades, not necessarily great. What about their signings? Well, like I said before, in 2021, they signed Wenberg, Schwartz, and Grubauer. All have gone on to not really amount to anything. In fact, the Grubauer contract is arguably one of the worst in the league. He has declined severely since he signed with the Kraken. In 2022, they signed Martin Jones, Justin Schultz, and Andrei Burakovsky to contracts. Again, they're fine players, but are they going to make you a much better team? No. In 2023, their only signing of note was Brian Dumoulin, and again, solid defenseman, but he's not going to stand out amongst that group. 2024 was the big free agency window for the Kraken, in my opinion. They made the two biggest signings that they've made in free agency, that being Chandler Stevenson at 7 years, $6.25 million, and Brandon Montour, 7 years, just over $7 million. Chandler Stevenson was coming off of a great run with the Vegas Golden Knights and really cashed in this free agency window. I can't blame him for that. Brandon Montour coming off of a Stanley Cup championship with the Florida Panthers, where he played a big role on that blue line. Both of these signings are fine in the grand scheme of things, but I do think they are a bit of an overpay. And especially with the protection on these two contracts, I don't think they were worth it in the end. So again, like I said with the trades, now I'm going to say it about the signings. Not a single one of these players makes them a much better team. If there's any signings that I think made them actually better, it's the Stevenson signing and the Montour signing that I think are net positives overall for the team, as they are some of their more important players. But are these two guys going to be able to get you back in the playoffs? As we've seen, clearly not. All right, we went from trades to signings. What about their draft history? And in my mind, this is the worst look for the Seattle Kraken in terms of their previous 5 years history, because they have not been a good team in majority of the seasons, and as a result have drafted pretty high, having 4 picks in the top 10 of the NHL draft since 2021, plus a plethora of second round picks, third round picks, yada yada yada. They've had a lot of selections over the last 5 years, and not really any of them have panned out the way that they wanted or just been straight up busts. Only 3 of their draft picks since their inception in 2021 have played at least 100 NHL games. Those guys are Matty Beniers, Shane Wright, and Riker Evans. They do have Ryan Winterton, who's played 86 games, and Berkeley Catton just played 66 in his first full season in the NHL, but only having 3 players reach the 100 NHL game mark over the last 5 years is, in my mind, just a complete failure when it comes to drafting. They drafted Edward Saleh in 2023. That was in the, I think, lower 20s, and he hasn't made the jump to the NHL yet. I think it's coming to the point where you kind of want to make the jump in the next year or two. And their most recent first-round pick, that being Jake O'Brien from last year's draft, did have a very good year in the OHL, put up a good amount of points in the OHL playoffs as well. He's played for Coachella Valley in the postseason. He may end up making the jump to the main roster next year, but overall, their draft history is not great in that first round. Since 2021, they've only had 3 of their 11 second-round picks play at least one NHL game. Those guys are Evans, like I said before, and Yanni Nyman, who's played 40 games, and Oscar Fisker-Molgaard, who's played just 13. So if you want to combine all this information, out of 16 picks in the first 2 rounds of the draft since 2021, only 5 players have played at least an NHL game for the Seattle Kraken. In my mind, not good enough. And diving even deeper, some of their picks, particularly Matty Beniers and Shane Wright, who are their 2 highest picks in their draft history, have not panned out whatsoever. Matty Beniers had a good rookie year, but since then has struggled to hit the 50-point mark. 196 points in 331 NHL games. By the way, he is signed to a 7-year contract at $7.14 million. And Shane Wright, 78 points in 169 games. He's an RFA next offseason in 2027. Both these guys, I think, have the potential to be solid top 6 players in the NHL, but in the grand scheme of things, they are not worth a top 5 selection at this point in their careers. Keep in mind, these guys are still young. Matty Beniers is 23, Shane Wright is 22, so there is room to grow, but when their peers in their same drafts, especially guys that were selected lower than them, have been able to perform better in the NHL since they got drafted, it just shows that the Seattle Kraken did not make the right selections at those picks, in my mind at least. So all of those moves over the last 5 years for the Seattle Kraken have led to a season where they finished 27th in league standings, 34, 37, and 11. They have lots of money locked up in players that, frankly, aren't difference makers for this team. They are solid, but they're not great. And a roster that just straight up looks mid. It does not look great. It does not look bad either. They are kind of stuck in a no man's land with their roster. They do have some promise when it comes to their future with Catton and Jake O'Brien, I think projecting to be solid top 6 players. But again, there isn't a superstar or star player to build around. So what can they do going forward? Well, they already got a head start and they got rid of Ron Francis, which I think is a good move. And they're doing an audit on the hockey operations side of the Seattle Kraken, which I think, again, is a good move because whatever they've been doing for the last 5 years has not worked and has not created a successful NHL franchise. In terms of this draft and this offseason, they have the 7th overall pick in the 2026 draft, a draft that I think they could select a pretty solid player at that pick, but are they going to get a star player or a difference maker? That remains to be seen. My initial thoughts are no, but they do have 2 first-round picks in this year's draft. If they keep both of them and select players with them, that is the first time in franchise history they've made multiple first-round selections in a single draft. And next season, they have 2 firsts and 2 seconds in the 2027 draft. They have $28 million in cap space to work with, where they are losing, in all likelihood, Jaden Schwartz, Eli Tolvanen, Bobby McMahon, and Jamie Alexiak. Unless they bring 1, maybe 2 of those guys back, that's a couple holes that you need to fill. So they have the money and the assets in my mind that they can go out and get a real difference maker in their lineup. But the question is that player going to be able to make enough of a difference to where Seattle becomes a playoff team in 2027? My initial thoughts are probably not. I think this is a longer-term project that needs to be taken on by Jason Botterill and whoever else the Kraken bring into their franchise. But they need to commit to some kind of direction. Are they going to try and get better and get into a playoff spot in 2027? Or do you look at where they're at right now, the players that they have, and say, you know what? I don't think this is going to work in the long term. If we want to build a Stanley Cup contender, the best option would be to trade assets and start a rebuild. But that doesn't make a difference that as of right now, the Seattle Kraken, in my mind, are the most mid team in the NHL. But let me know in the comment section below, what did you think about this video? What did you think about my thoughts on the Seattle Kraken as a whole? And what do they need to do to get out of this situation? Do they need to rebuild? Or do you think they could spend some assets and spend some money and get into a playoff spot in 2027? But that is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Again, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you are new, and I will see you in the next video. Peace out.